Welcome to Quick Scare, the channel where nightmares come to life. Tonight, we bring you a collection of stories that will haunt your thoughts long after the video ends. Are you brave enough? Buckle up because I've got a chilling tale from my days as a pilot that still haunts my dreams. I've been debating whether to share this story, but the memories have been gnawing at me, and maybe putting it out there will help me make sense of it all. So, let me set the stage. It was a cold winter night and I was flying a red-eye from Chicago to New York. The plane was your standard commercial jet and everything seemed normal as we ascended into the night sky. I'd been doing this route for years and I thought I knew the routine like the back of my hand. About an hour into the flight, the passengers were asleep and the cabin was silent. That's when things started to get weird. I noticed a faint red glow on the horizon, and it wasn't the usual city lights. It was an eerie, pulsating red that seemed to be getting closer with each passing minute. I radioed the air traffic control, asking if they had any other flights in the vicinity, but they assured me we were alone up there. The strange thing was, the red glow didn't show up on the radar. As we flew closer, the glow intensified, casting an unsettling hue over the entire cockpit. I squinted into the darkness, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. That's when I noticed something truly bizarre, a figure standing on the edge of the wing. My heart skipped a beat, and I blinked, thinking it was just my tired eyes playing tricks on me. But when I opened them again, the figure was still there, bathed in the eerie red light. It was a silhouette, humanoid in shape, with glowing red eyes fixed on me. I radioed my co-pilot, telling him to look, but he couldn't see anything. Panic set in, and I wondered if I was losing my mind. The figure on the wing seemed to beckon me, and against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. I strapped on my harness and opened the cockpit door, the howling wind greeting me as I stepped onto the narrow walkway. The red-eyed figure was still there, staring right through me. I cautiously approached, the rhythmic thud of the engines the only sound in the freezing night air. As I reached out to touch the figure, it vanished into thin air. I stumbled back, my mind racing to comprehend what had just happened. The red glow on the horizon began to fade, and the cockpit lights returned to their normal hue. I stumbled back into the cockpit, bewildered and shaken. My co-pilot stared at me, concern etched across his face. I tried to explain, but the words caught in my throat. We continued the flight in silence, the bizarre encounter haunting my every thought. When we landed in New York, I rushed to the airport authorities to report what I had seen. They looked at me like I was crazy, insisting that there were no other aircraft in the vicinity and that everything was normal on their end. Days turned into weeks, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I started researching the history of the flight, looking for any clues that might explain the mysterious figure on the wing. That's when I stumbled upon a decades-old news article about a pilot who had reported a similar encounter on the exact same route. The twist? The pilot had been me. I frantically searched for more information, but the trail went cold. It was as if the event had been wiped from existence, erased from the records. I questioned my sanity, wondering if I had somehow slipped into an alternate reality. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. Was it a hallucination, a glitch in reality, or something else entirely? All I know is that the red-eyed figure on the wing is a haunting memory that lingers in the dark corners of my mind, a chilling enigma that refuses to be forgotten. It was a chilly evening when I found myself at Gate 13 of an obscure airport in the middle of nowhere. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows on the dull, worn-out carpet. The airport, though not deserted, seemed strangely quiet, as if the whispers of forgotten stories lingered in the air. I had missed my connecting flight and found myself stranded in this forgotten corner of the world. The airline staff assured me there was another flight in a few hours, but the dimly lit terminal and the desolate surroundings made me uneasy. It felt like I was the only soul in this forgotten place. As I settled into one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs, I noticed a man in a worn-out suit sitting a few seats away. He had a haggard appearance with sunken eyes that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 stories. Glancing around, I realized there were only a handful of people scattered across the terminal, each absorbed in their own solitude. Minutes turned to hours as I waited, the occasional announcement echoing through the empty space. It was during one of these announcements that I noticed something peculiar. A whisper, barely audible, seemed to ride the edges of the speaker's voice. At first, I dismissed it as my imagination playing tricks on me, but as I strained my ears, the whispers grew louder. Curiosity got the better of me, and I approached the man in the worn-out suit. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of fear and resignation. "They're always here," he muttered, gesturing to the empty seats around us. "What do you mean?" I pressed, my unease growing. He leaned in, his voice barely audible. "The shadows. They come when you least expect it, lingering in the corners where the light can't reach." I scoffed, thinking he was just another weary traveler lost in his own delusions. However, as the hours passed and the terminal sank deeper into darkness, I began to notice something odd. Shadows seemed to detach themselves from the walls, stretching and contorting in ways that defied logic. The man in the worn-out suit grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Don't let them touch you," he warned. "Once they do, you become one of them." I shook him off, my skepticism still intact, but a seed of doubt had been planted. As I sat back down, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The shadows danced along the edges of my vision, elusive and sinister. Finally, the boarding call for my flight came, and I eagerly joined the small queue of passengers. The airport staff, seemingly oblivious to the strange occurrences, directed us towards the plane waiting on the tarmac. I boarded the small aircraft, hoping to leave the unsettling atmosphere of the airport behind. The plane taxied down the runway, and as it lifted off, I stole one last glance at the terminal below. The man in the worn-out suit stood at the window, his eyes pleading. Then, as if on cue, the entire terminal was consumed by darkness. I dismissed it as a trick of the light, but a sinking feeling gnawed at the pit of my stomach. The flight was uneventful, and as we landed at my final destination, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The shadows were nothing more than a bizarre episode in a forgotten airport, or so I thought. Days passed, and the memory of the eerie airport faded into the background of my busy life. That is until I noticed a peculiar shadow lurking in the corners of my apartment. It was subtle at first, but it grew more defined with each passing day. Panic set in as I realized the truth. I had brought the shadows with me. In a desperate attempt to escape, I booked another flight to a distant city, hoping the shadows would remain behind. The airport was bustling, the complete opposite of the desolate terminal I had left behind. As I sat at the gate, surrounded by the chatter of fellow travelers, a familiar whisper reached my ears. The shadows had followed me. A cold sweat broke out as I scanned the crowd, realizing that everyone around me was oblivious to the encroaching darkness. The man in the worn-out suit materialized beside me, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and regret. "They're always one step behind," he whispered, fading away like a wisp of smoke. Panic set in as the shadows closed in, their inky tendrils reaching out for me. Desperation took over, and I sprinted towards the exit, abandoning my belongings in a futile attempt to escape the relentless darkness. As I burst out into the blinding sunlight, the shadows retreated, vanishing as if they were never there. I stood gasping for breath, the reality of what had transpired sinking in. The man in the worn-out suit had been right. Once touched by the shadows, there was no escape. The unexpected plot twist wasn't the shadows themselves. It was the realization that the darkness wasn't confined to that forgotten airport. It was a pervasive force, lurking in the corners of the world, waiting for the opportune moment to consume those who dared to cross its path. And so, as I stood in the glaring sunlight, I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were still there, waiting patiently for the next unsuspecting traveler to cast a long, chilling flight of shadows. Heart still racing? Comment your frightful thoughts and subscribe for more quick scares. Keep those goosebumps handy. We'll be back.